Something's wrong.
Do it! Kill her!
What have you done?
Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver is the follow-up to Zack Snyder's widely criticized Rebel Moon Part 1, A Child of Fire, which premiered last December and held the dubious distinction of being Snyder's worst reviewed work to date. Unfortunately, this second part, while shorter and more direct than its predecessor, fails to revive the franchise, marked by its lazy attempt at world building and character development. The sequel continues in a universe initially conceived as a Star Wars spin-off. Snyder, known for his directorial work on Dawn of the Dead, Watchmen and 300, arguably his most acclaimed films, is also known for his directorial work on Army of the Dead and the Rebel Moon duology, arguably his worst films to date. While his first 3 films helped launch his career, his past 3 movies have cratered it. Perhaps this is why he's such a polarizing filmmaker. While others get better with time, over the decades, like fine wine, he seems to have regressed and depreciated in quality, like milk left out in the sun. Instead of maturing and enriching his craft, he's continued to expand on his worst tendencies as a filmmaker. I think it's important to note that Dawn of the Dead was a remake of a beloved classic and was written by James Gunn, while Watchmen and 300 were direct adaptations of graphic novels that pretty much told him what to do, word for word, shot for shot. He had training wheels on, as it were, and served merely as a director, something he seemed to do competently enough. But over time, he's taken on more responsibilities in his projects, so much so that Army of the Dead, Rebel Moon Part 1 and Part 2 were written, produced, shot, and directed by him. It's full Snyder in action, without oversight to correct or tame back his worst sensibilities as a filmmaker, hence why they're so bad. Part 1 set the stage, laboriously introducing the agrarian moon Velt, which is somehow pivotal to the space-age fascists of the Motherworld, much like the grain essential to Kurosawa's 16th century bandits. Bandits wanting grain makes sense in the turbulence and Goku period in feudal Japan, but in a space opera, surely some kind of rare mineral only found on Velt would have been a better driving force for the Imperium.
Farming, that is our skill, that we can do, that they cannot.
That is without a doubt the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You are a fucking idiot.
Also, why would the grain harvested by one small community of no more than 300 people be so essential to an intergalactic empire that controls hundreds if not thousands of planets? Nobody seems to know. Although I suspect it might have something to do with the fact that the Imperium eradicate entire worlds on a whim. Yep, they wipe out key planets with networks and resources that had once supplied them with what they needed like it's a regular Tuesday. They're so inept that it baffles the mind as to how they became the leading figure in the galaxy, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Part 1 established the oppressive Imperium, with Ed Skrein's character, Admiral Noble, as a cruel enforcer, and Sofia Boutella's Kora living on Velt with hidden connections to Noble's superior, Balisarius, an evil regent who usurped the galaxy's throne. The film wasted no time in painting the Imperial government as the epitome of evil, with Noble and his men depicted as being over the top in their villainy. Their tactics are so excessively vicious and cruel that it makes you wonder how these seemingly unhinged people ever built an empire in the first place, let alone managed to run it. With the Imperium wanting the grain from Velt, we follow a journey through bland CGI environments as Kora and Gunnar recruited allies to defend the moon. The ensemble cast were given what felt like a mere 5 minutes of fame. Each character paraded their combat skills or shared a brief tragic backstory before blending into the background, never to be fleshed out further. The first movie effectively morphed into an endless loop of first acts, each one shorter and more bewildering than the last. Brand new characters pop up, initially hesitant to join the cause, only to be swayed by Kora's rather uninspiring pep talks about this being their chance for revenge, as if the thought had never crossed their mind.
If not redemption, what about revenge?
What started as a samurai-inspired epic quickly descended into a parody. The warriors don't get time to talk to each other, quarrel, bond over their shared experiences and hatred of the Imperium, or reveal more of their history or personality. It was like Snyder is allergic to character growth and development. The Scargiver fails to make up for this deficiency, making it a particularly disheartening chapter in what should have been an easier narrative arc to execute. The script is fundamentally flawed, with a story structure so closely mirroring Seven Samurai that it feels less like a homage and more like a direct copy with a Star Wars paint job. All that Snyder has done is take cues from our favorite classics without comprehending what made those movies work, from the compelling story, characters with a journey, emotional depth, to the brilliant world building. He's effectively made a universe that's cold and uninviting, while doing the seemingly impossible, making space look dull. His world is devoid of the charm, fun, or pulse-quickening excitement that often lights up science fiction. And while sagas like Star Wars and Dune use their worlds to explore deeply human themes, Rebel Moon is content to merely dress up in the aesthetic of these classics. The shortcomings of these films are not due to the actors, who are capable performers, but stem from the script they're constrained to. The screenplay, half derived from Kurosawa and half consisting of Snyder's disjointed digressions, includes so many notable absurd moments. One example, which we'll dive into further later, is the assassination of the royal family, staged akin to Caesar's murder in the Senate. This is bizarrely accompanied by live orchestra, scoring the music to match the tempo of the action taking place, despite them having bags on their heads because, as Snyder would say, it looks cool. The problem, though, is that cool without purpose is merely spectacle without substance. And there's the rub. Snyder's visual flair always sacrifices narrative depth for aesthetic impact, resulting in scenes that, while visually intriguing, do not contribute meaningfully to the story's development, any themes, or emotional resonance. This leaves us with a hollow experience, where the style is disconnected from the storyline and character arcs, failing to engage us beyond the superficial level. I mean, in the Scargiver, we have slow-mo for the sake of slow-mo, many scenes out of focus, two-dimensional characters, incoherent dialogue and character interactions, plot armor, broken world mechanics, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's also an abridged exposition dump of character histories in a forced circle of flashbacks, suggesting a hasty attempt by Snyder to insert overdue character development from the first film. Hey guys, what's happening? Nihat here with Film Comics Explained, and today it's my absolute pain to break down Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver. The movie opens with exposition from Jimmy the Robot, who we saw go against his programming to kill the Imperium soldiers hounding a village girl at the beginning of Part 1, before disappearing for the rest of the film. Here we're given a rundown of Velt, its villagers, Admiral Noble's arrival on the Dreadnought demanding grain, Kora and Gunnar's attempt to put a team together, and the location of each of the warriors they recruited. We're then told that Kora defeated Noble, and the warriors returned to Velt to collect their pay, believing the threat of the Dreadnought was extinguished. It's hard to believe that an Imperial ship would simply give up on its mission once its admiral was killed, but this is apparently protocol, so we just have to go with it for now. It's then explained that the warriors were wrong to assume this was the end. Well, no shit, not only because that's not how military engagements work, but because we'd already seen the resurrection of Noble at the end of Part 1.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
It would have made a little bit more sense for them to have defeated the enemy, return, celebrate, and then have the audience discover that Noble was alive shortly after, perhaps at the beginning of this film. It also would have been better for the first film not to have existed, as you could pretty much hear this exposition and be caught up. Anyway, we cut over to the King's Gate, where the Chief Technician and Commander Cassius discuss the rehabilitation of Noble.
Commander Cassius.
He is alive.
He is.
Chef's kiss to the dialogue here. It's truly a script that ever was.
Thank the all gods, our prayers have been answered.
We never saw them praying. We don't even know that religion is practiced in this universe beyond this throwaway line. If religion is a thing in this universe, it would have been nice to see this mythology explored more. Does the Imperium worship gods that are at odds with the religions of other planets? Perhaps this caused a rift in the galaxy. These are things that could have been subtly injected into the script by a more competent writer, but there is no attempt at world building here.
By the old gods, I'll have each and every one of you court-martialed!
Who the hell are the old gods? I have no idea. Words without meaning are just noise. Empty, hollow echoes that fail to add depth or context to the narrative.
Gods demand a tribute. It is the thrusting of hips that summon the seedlings to sprout.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man? Bro, I'm out, man. It's tripping.
Noble explains that the Scargiver is on Velt, prompting his number one Cassius to set a course for the farming moon. I should point out that there's no way for him to know this for sure. He's merely assuming that she was stupid enough to head back there. After all, Kora is the most wanted criminal in the galaxy. All Noble initially wanted was the grain. What Kora effectively did in Part 1 by forming the team and supposedly killing Noble is ensure that a war was going to take place. She's condemned the peaceful villagers to a battle they should not be able to win, and where some of them will lose their lives. As we cut over to Velt, Hagen and Den welcome the warriors to the village, offering them food and drink.
I'm Hagen, this is Den. We welcome you to our humble village.
A huge feast has been prepared, but since the villagers had no way of communicating with Kora, how did they make all of this in time? Has the food just been sitting there for a few days, and what happened to them not having any grain to spare?
You supply us with food, whatever you have to spare, of course.
The land yields barely enough to feed ourselves.
Now please, eat.
When the group arrive and ask where the villagers were, we're told that they were ashamed that they could not defend themselves from the Imperium, and thus would not greet them. I'm sorry, what? The Imperium is knocking on their door and about to exploit them for all they have, and they hired warriors to protect them, yet they're somehow ashamed of doing the logical thing. You see, in Seven Samurai, the movie that Snyder's trying to copy, the reason the villagers did not initially greet the samurai they've hired is out of fear of them. The warriors were notorious for sleeping with farmers' daughters and were, well, dangerous. Their initial meeting is tense as a result, but as the samurai who agreed to help them for a pittance realize this is why, their initial anger at not being greeted is turned to shame. It's a significant plot point that is the first step in the warriors bonding with the farmers that have hired them to help. It's a major moment of character growth, which might be why Snyder neglected to include it here. It's an example of Snyder wanting to copy the classic, but not understanding the fundamental mechanics of how and why that story actually worked. That film is not just about the battle, but the journey and growth each of the characters go on.
How would you feel if you were not capable of standing to protect your own?
This prompts Emilius to respond by saying,
"To swallow their pride enough to even ask for help, that is bravery."
Yeah, we know there is no shame in asking for help, and the villagers have good reason to do so, but it's also not brave to ask someone else to fight in your stead. Meanwhile, Aris and Sam discuss their arrival in the barn.
How they look?
Strong.
It won't matter how strong they are.
Why did Aris bother asking how the warriors looked if his response was going to be it won't matter? What is this dialogue? At least have them talk like normal people. There's a romantic subplot that's hinted between the two here, so their lines could have been spent setting that up at the very least. Or maybe his backstory and how or why he joined the Imperium in the first place. You know, giving some depth to his character. There are so many examples like this where characters talk and say nothing, without contributing to the development of the story, themes, or giving us insights into who they are. The next scene has Aris receive a transmitter from Cassius, asking him how the harvest is going, implying that he's been in communication with the Imperium while the warriors were away. Would have been nice to see this in part 1, but okay. He believes that he's fooled them into believing that everything was going smoothly.
All is on target. Nothing out of the ordinary.
No, sir.
The Imperium want the grain and seem to be desperate for it. You'd think that they'd have entire worlds dedicated to the harvesting and production of food to feed their Imperium, but that's beside the point. Because if we go with the notion that they are indeed desperate for the grain, the death of Noble would not stop them from coming back. But Snyder seems to have forgotten this logical conclusion, as Kora seems to think their job is done.
Imperial protocol, in the event of an admiral's death, to return to the motherworld.
As far as the Imperium is concerned, they have a garrison there waiting for them to help take the harvest from the village, so if they're not coming back for the grain, at the very least they would be coming back to pick up their own men. And how was it protocol for the death of an admiral to cause a battleship to cower and return home? This is a major exploit for resistance fighters, who would just assassinate all admirals to end the conflict. Of course, Aris informs her that they'll be there in 5 days, despite protocol.
But death is not always deterrent enough for the designs of the mother world.
As I said before, Kora and co. should assume that they're not just coming back for the grain, but also for their garrison. This is because the villagers and warriors don't know that Noble and Cassius have discovered their garrison were already killed.
Ensure that the harvest is brought in as planned in 5 days' time.
And it's clear that Faunus and Marcus and the rest of their men are dead.
2 things here. 1, they aren't going to let this go and are going to come down on the village with a vengeance. And second, why would Cassius tell Aris they're about to land in 5 days if they know he's a traitor? It's like a bank robber calling the bank they intend to break into and letting them know which day they'll be arriving in advance. Why are the villains written as being so bloody stupid? The greatest asset they have at their disposal, other than thousands of men, the King's Gaze, dozens of dropships, mechanized tanks, and overall superior firepower, is the element of surprise. They could have told them they'd be there in 15 to 20 days, making the villagers believe they had more time to prepare, leading to complacency in their efforts, but they tell them exactly how much time they need to mount a defense. If they didn't do this, the battle would have been over the moment the soldiers arrived, but in a major contrivance, the enemy have to give the farmers the heads up for the story to continue. With the warriors getting this intel, General Titus requests for the villagers to gather and hear him speak.
We may all have to stand together to succeed. There must be trust.
A few things here. What does Titus mean by, we may all have to stand together? Do or do not, there is no may. They will have to stand together, as the warriors can't go up against a battalion on their own. And secondly, why is the topic of trust being forced upon the villagers? Seven Samurai took ample time to develop its characters' relationships over 3 hours, enhancing the emotional stakes of the battle. In it, the trust between the samurai and villagers is developed through mutual understanding and shared hardship, but here it's demanded by Titus. It's here that I realize that not only do the villagers and warriors not know anything about each other, but we also know nothing about the villagers and warriors. They're just two-dimensional characters with no depth to them. He explains that in time, he will teach them how to fight, but first needs them to show their strength in the way of the land. Titus then asks how long it takes them to bring in their crops, and is told about half a cycle around Mara. But we have no way of understanding how long that is, as we don't know how long it takes Velp to orbit Mara. On that note, he doesn't know how long a cycle is either. It could be a couple of hours, a week, or a month. We don't have a reference point, and neither does Titus. Nonetheless, he responds as if he understood, and pushes back by saying that it must be completed in 3 days' time. This is one of many examples of the writers conflating the information and understanding that one character has with another character. It would have made more sense for Kora or Gunnar, who have lived here for a few years, to jump in and explain that it must be done faster. Regardless, the general is told by the confused villagers that it can't be done in 3 days. You see, his plan is to use the grain, which he describes as their most powerful weapon, as both a bartering tool and shield, as without it, he believed that they would blow them out of existence from orbit. Given Noble and his men will be arriving in 5 days, that means they'll be spending most of their time harvesting grain. This leaves only a day for them to build fortifications and train farmers to fight in a battle against the King's Gaze. Thousands of men, dozens of dropships, mechanized tanks, and overall superior firepower.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
At most, they should be spending 1 day on the grain. Hell, they could even fill the bags with sand as a ruse to save time, giving them 4 days to train, which, while not desirable, would still be better than 1 day.
The grain. Without it, they are liable to blow us out of existence.
It's the grain. Look, they piled it against the building so we can't destroy them.
5 minutes later.
Cassius, you may fire on the village. There's no need for the grain now.
Whoa! This is worthless.
It's less than worthless, my boy.
With Titus telling them that they'll begin harvest at dawn, we cut over to Kora and Gunnar, who are debating if they will learn to trust one another. This was confusing, as it's not clear who he's referring to by they. If he's talking about the villagers, he should know if they trust each other. After all, he grew up here, and there's no reason for the harmonious community to be distrustful of each other, as nothing has been shown to demonstrate this is the case. He might be referring to the warriors, and that would make more sense, considering they don't really know each other quite yet, as Snyder's neglected to include any team-building exercise. But that can't be the case, as Kora's next line is,
They're frightened of outsiders, the battle to come.
Which means Gunnar was asking a pointless question that he should have the answer to. It doesn't make sense. It's just filler dialogue with no thought into what is being said or why it's being said.
Trust, I don't know.
Neither do I. I have no idea what's going on here.
I just hope they all have the courage to stand and fight, if it comes to it.
Again, what the hell is this? What does she mean if it comes to it? Is Kora still in denial and believes that the Imperium is not coming due to protocol? Everyone else has accepted that there's a battle to come, and instead of getting ready, Snyder has Kora and Gunnar having a meaningless conversation to set up a corny scene between them that follows.
I had no idea what it would be like to fight, how much it would scare me.
What was it you were so afraid of?
It was losing you.
Cut to them out of focus, kissing, with the rings of Mara in the background. Focus is a primary tool for directing the viewer's attention to specific details or actions within the frame. By focusing on a particular subject while blurring others, a competent filmmaker can make it clear what is important at that moment in the story. What Snyder is essentially telling us without realizing through visual language is that Kora and Gunnar are less important than the rings of Mara in the background. It's inept filmmaking. This shallow focus approach to shooting scenes was galvanized by Snyder in Army of the Dead, the first film he ever worked on as cinematographer. In it, he used a rare damaged 60s Canon Dream lens, took it apart and rehoused it to be a cinema lens to blur the backgrounds and foregrounds of scenes, described by him as being a new visual trick that gave the footage a dreamlike look and feel.
I had been down this rabbit hole for a couple years with these Canon Dream lenses. The Canon Dream lenses are these lenses built in the 60s, but they have this really kind of creamy, crazy, Boken-looking things. Anyway, they're just really, I find them really particularly cool. So, cut to, I'm gonna shoot Army. I'm gonna shoot the entire movie wide open. There's never gonna be a stop on any lens for the entire film. And I just feel like it's a rude thing to ask of a cinematographer. It was really about just sort of taking responsibility for the experimental nature of what I wanted to do. And that if it was a complete f*** up, then it'd be my fault.
It's not a new trick to have things out of focus, mate, and it doesn't make scenes look dreamlike, but hellish, with us straining our eyes to see what's going on. I appreciate him doing something experimental and taking responsibility, but it should have ended in Army of the Dead, not expanded upon here. To be honest, it would have ended there if there was any oversight in these films, but it's full Snyder on display here. God help me, I'm only 12 minutes into a 2-hour film. We then find Kora and Gunnar in bed, post-coitus, with the man finally asking her about what Noble had meant by Kora being the most wanted criminal in the known universe.
You don't become that simply by running away.
Kora reminds him about how she was raised by Belisarius, regent of the Imperium, and that she was the bodyguard to Princess Issa. When asked what happened to the royal family, she explains.
Under the influence of his daughter, the king had begun to see things in a different light.
What, that pillaging and conquering worlds is bad? We then cut to a flashback where we're told the king had decided to end the age of expansion of his empire with the dedication of what he hoped would be the last Dreadnought-class battleship. While it was tradition for the king to dedicate this ship, this would be his daughter's first royal duty and official act. As a result, the ship would be named Peacemaker and bear her royal seal. As we see the royal family arrive on the Dreadnought, Kora justifies her actions by saying,
I could not betray him. He had told me the princess must die, and die she would.
An inability to take responsibility surely makes for an endearing protagonist. The royal family then arrive in a hangar to a live orchestra with bags on their heads playing melancholy music, as Belisarius stands with his back to them, surrounded by senators in togas.
Strange. Something's wrong.
What gave it away? Is it the orchestra composing the score in real time with bags on their heads, the senators in togas, or the lack of decorum or security for your family here? As the king, who I should remind you doesn't have a first or last name like the queen because Snyder didn't put any thought into it, demands Belisarius to explain why the furnaces are lit. The senators begin to surround the king and queen, armed with daggers. It's as if Snyder just found out about the death of Caesar and wanted to include it. The blindfolded musicians then begin to pick up the tempo. No, I'm not kidding you. They begin to do the musical score as the king and queen are executed without mercy.
Issa, run! Issa!
This is supposed to be a tragic scene, but it's so comical in its execution. Pun intended.
No. Do it. Kill her. Kill her!
Now, I've seen this one. This is a classic.
Get in my belly!
Princess Issa then tells Kora that she forgives her as Kora shoots the royal guards and executes the princess as commanded. While her death is a tragedy, we must remember her parents were the head of the war machine that had caused so much suffering in the galaxy before their 180-degree pivot towards good. So it's hard to have sympathy for the king and queen, who were as irredeemable as the regent. You can't just have characters slaughter and oppress thousands of worlds and billions of people and expect people to have sympathy for them when they have a change of heart. That sympathy is reserved for the people's lives they destroyed. Bizarrely, instead of celebrating, Belisarius tells the soldiers to seize Kora, stating that she was the assassin of the royal family. It's hard to understand why he takes this course of action. He could have easily pinned the assassination on literally anybody and also executed them, instead of trying to pin it on one of the most dangerous soldiers under his command. And if he was smart to tie up loose ends, he wouldn't be here, and he wouldn't have any witnesses, including the senators, and more importantly, the live band he hired to play during the murders. I mean, these guys could easily inform others in the Imperium that they were hired to play music during the assassination by the Regent. It's just utter madness.
There she is, gentlemen. The assassin of the royal family.
The senators then begin to aggressively call her a murderer.
Murderer!
Who is the dialogue here for? It's not for the senators, as they were in on the plan. It's not for the musicians, as they too knew what was going to happen, as their impeccable musical timing indicated. It's also not for the royal family, as, well, they're dead. That's when I realized the only person it could possibly be for is Kora, the only character here that's in the dark about the double betrayal. He then proceeds to say that she is
a cancer of ethnic impurity.
Okay, why is ethnicity now being brought into this? What is this ethnicity that is a cancer? Is the Imperium now racist? This is strange, especially considering one of the senators here is black. Hell, Titus was a general in their army, so clearly it's not been an issue before. It's incoherent dribble at best, an attempt for the writers to make Belisarius look evil without considering the effect the words he says have on the world building. I think it's also important to note that the royal bloodline has endured for thousands of years. The average time between generations can be roughly estimated at about 25 years, meaning there would be around 40 generations over 1,000 years. By the modern era, assuming that each generation modestly expands, accounting for deaths and those who didn't have children, the family tree should include cousins, second cousins, and other distant relations. This means that in order for Belisarius to claim the title of regent, he would have had to murder more members of the royal family to truly end their bloodline. But Snyder hasn't thought of this in the same way that he didn't bother to give the king or queen a name beyond their title, or explain how life in this Imperium works. Come on, Carrie Elwes deserved better than that, don't you think?
Answer me, man! Bastard!
And despite telling his men to seize her, we have two men grab each of her arms instead of disarming her, which conveniently enables her to shoot all the guards. Yet when faced with the opportunity to kill Belisarius and all the senators that betrayed her, Kora just runs away. There's so much contrivance here, not only Kora remaining unharmed, but in also having her do nothing to Belisarius and the senators. Remember, in part 1, he killed her family, forced her to join the Imperium, and has now killed another family that she had grown to love.
I felt the only way to honor her was to run.
No, the only way to honor her would have been to kill those that executed her family, which would include Belisarius, the senators, the musicians who were complicit, and herself, to be honest. Then we wouldn't have had any need for the two films. What's strange is that she merely boards a dropship and flies away.
I just hope they all have the courage to stand and fight, if it comes to it. The crews of the Imperium are not known for their bravery.
We later learn that these things have transponders that enable them to be tracked, and could even be remotely controlled by the Dreadnoughts. It's a significant plot point that enables Kora and Gunnar to board the King's Gates later, but that's left out here for the sake of convenience. There's no sense of continuity in the same film. Not only that, but why aren't there any dropships following her?
Answer me, man!
She could have said a line about disabling her tracker, and we could have had a shot of her blowing up a few dropships in the hangar before leaving. What I'm getting at is that there are contrivances and major inconsistencies like this that could have been fixed with a redraft, or another set of eyes looking over the script to improve it.
And try to be more than a weapon.
What you are.
What really bugged me was that instead of being disgusted that he just slept with a child murderer, Gunnar just comforts her. Nobody behaves like a real person or in character. They just act exactly as they need to for us to reach the next plot point. This could have been a source of internal conflict between Kora and Gunnar, something they'd have to resolve by the end, but there's no attempt at character or nuance.
Why am I not surprised?
At dawn, all the men and women wake up to begin harvesting grain. Snyder seems to have found a new fetish with agriculture, as we get about 5 minutes of slow-motion grain harvesting. When asked why Rebel Moon had so much slow motion, Snyder had said,
"The obvious answer is slow motion is awesome. These movies are physical. There's a physicality to what our heroes go through. The use of slow motion, to me, is a way of just embellishing heroic moments that our heroes go through."
I get its use in battle scenes, but how is harvesting grain a heroic moment? But it's not just a slow-mo that's an issue here. They're wasting 80% of their preparation time to do this instead of, preparing to fight. They're effectively left with 1 day to train 300 farmers for combat against a well-equipped and supposedly strictly trained armada that we're led to believe are conquerors of worlds.
We don't have much time!
Then why are you wasting it? I also couldn't help but laugh at the fact that we see them load the wheat onto a wagon that's suspended in the air, but somehow still needed a Uruk-hai to pull it. What is the physics involved in this technology? None of it makes any sense. As we cut back to the King's Gates, Noble is chucking a tantrum for not being medically cleared to resume command.
Treason! By the old gods, I'll have every one of you court-martialed!
Honestly, I can't even be mad at Ed Skrein. He's doing his best to have a great time playing the cartoonish villain that's been written for him.
There are protocols before you can be cleared to resume command.
The technician explains that there are protocols they need to follow and tests to be conducted to see if he's mentally and physically ready. And so naturally, Noble chokes him and executes him on the spot, indicating that he was sound of mind. Nobody seems to follow protocol today, and in the first 20 minutes, we've seen the Imperium kill more of their own men than the enemy. This is truly an empire that I can believe is the leading power in the galaxy. With Cassius apologizing for them not being able to remove the scar that Kora gave him, Noble tells him to leave it, as she had given it to him. He continues that when he delivers her to Belisarius and her body is displayed to the Senate.
It's a symbol that it is I who brought to justice the Scargiver.
Hang on, is this scar the reason she's called the Scargiver? Because I'm pretty sure they were calling her that in part 1.
The most wanted fugitive in the known universe, Scargiver.
I'm a murderer, just like you, Sweeney Todd. See, it all connects. Not that I know you're a murderer. My character doesn't know that yet.
Yep, he called her that before their confrontation, so where did she get that name from? Did she kill the enemies of the Empire in her previous role, or did she merely scar them? None of the dialogue in the script makes any sense, they just appear to sound cool to Snyder. Also, what happened to the sockets in Noble's cyborg body that we saw him use in part 1? There's a scene where he's inserting electronic tentacles, alluded to as being some sort of power source, but it's no longer on him. Where is the bloody continuity? They either forgot about this or scrapped the idea altogether in between films, and honestly, I don't know which one is worse. And then we're back to more slow-mo grain harvesting. With war on the horizon, and the villagers yet to prepare for it, we then waste more time with Sam giving the warriors banners as thanks for their help.
I hope my gifts don't insult you with their simplicity.
She tells Titus that he was strong and unmoving like the mountains, so he gets a banner of a mountain. The spirit of Tarek is untamable, but his nobility is undeniable, like the snow elk. Milius shines as the sun, bringing them warmth and comfort. Nemesis is fierce as a storm, with its life-giving rain, and like the storm is the mother of them all. Gunnar is their heart who gives them hope, while Kora is their guardian wolf, standing between them and annihilation. But the main issue is not only that this world is so devoid of originality or imagination that the only symbols used are a mountain, elk, storm, the sun, a heart, and a wolf, nor that they're wasting more time that could be spent gearing up, talking strategies, or checking inventory. It's that Sam doesn't know these people. Titus hasn't led them yet. He merely told them they need to harvest grain quickly. The notion of Tarek having an untamable spirit and undeniable nobility would be apt if Sam had seen him tame the hippogriff in the previous film, and knew something about his royal lineage, but she doesn't. All Milius did was tell them they were brave for asking them for help. Nemesis is a mother in grieving, so noting that she was the mother of them all would have also made sense if Sam knew this about her, but she doesn't. Gunnar, being the Heartless, is a reference to him representing the compassionate nature of the villagers. But Kora isn't really their guardian wolf. In fact, she'd kill the only person that she was ever charged with guarding, which the villagers don't know yet. In part 1, she was about to leave them, because she felt nothing for the village and was driven by only guilt for killing the princess, not love for the villagers that took her in. All the banner sequence merely shows is that the script is conflating information the villagers and Sam know with that of the audience who've been on the journey to witness a glimpse of who these characters are. Once more, is trying to replicate the moment in Seven Samurai where the villagers give the warriors one banner representing their thanks, but none of it is earned here. The farmers know nothing about the warriors. If they really want this scene, then there would have needed to be moments where the warriors talked with the villagers about their experiences to endear themselves to them. But as far as it stands, there hasn't been a single scene with Titus, Tarek, Nemesis, Milius or Kora talking about their life or experiences with the villagers. While Sam, Den and Hagen have talking roles, we don't know anything else about them. Hagen is the village elder. Den loves Kora and Sam was saved by Kora. That's the extent of their characterization. Everyone else in the village is also just part of the collective. There's nothing that distinguishes them from each other. It's pretty much the same for the warriors, who merely want revenge on the Imperium. They're all just two-dimensional characters. At least with Seven Samurai, each warrior had a different reason for being there, and the fighters were not helping out of shared hatred for the bandits, but for the sake of doing the right thing. They had no stake in the fight and got paid a pittance.
Today we begin the preparation for our defense.
Hey, better late than never, huh?
Finally, after stacking the grain on the barns and structures, we get to the last day of preparation, where everyone gets started on building fortifications as Titus, Nemesis, Tarek and Kora train the farmers on how to fight.
We start by moving the grain so that they can't shoot us from orbit.
They also go over all the weapons taken from the small garrison that were killed in Part 1, something that should have been done on day 1. You might expect that considering they'd never fired weapons before, that there would be a learning curve to overcome, with them missing their first few shots, making everyone worried that they weren't ready, before the villagers start becoming better and more confident in their abilities. But no, everyone's first shot is a perfect hit. There's no growth or progress in these efforts, and everyone seems to be great on their first try. I'm sorry, but these are grain harvesting farmers, not hunters.
Like a professional.
Yeah, but he's not, is he? In Kurosawa's classic, we actually see the villagers unsure of what they were doing at first, and it's through instruction and practice that they get better. Also, key to their success is the brilliant strategy of creating traps and leading the enemy into death zones, areas where they were vulnerable, none of which we see here in the battle to come. As we pick up with Nemesis and Tarek, we see them training the rest of the villagers to use their harvesting tools as weapons.
So what we're going to try and do is that.
There's no mention of form or technique. They're just slashing at stationary hay targets, like their enemies are just going to stand there and wait for them to hack their hands and heads off. What's funny is that none of this hacking is actually used in the battle to come, as I'm sure while they were shooting the film, they realized the futility of having farmers try to hack at soldiers armed with rifles. Also, the underground bunkers they managed to dig are large and extremely well supported, and can't have been made in a day. They could have at least shown us a handful of men making this from day 1, as everyone else was harvesting grain. The rest of the villagers make their way to Kora's dropship, which they say is in bad shape. Their plan is to pull it out as Jimmy the robot watch from the mountaintop, but a few minutes later, we find out the ship is in perfect working order, so this was another complete waste of time, as Kora could have simply flown it to where they wanted it to be.
Wow, it still works.
Now that we're 40 minutes into this film, and effectively 2 hours and 40 minutes into the duology, Snyder thinks it's a great time for the warriors to finally talk to each other.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
Hey, if you forgot it, it probably wasn't all that important.
Yeah, I guess.
I'd forgive the late introductions that should have been included in the first film if it weren't for the inept way it's treated here in pure exposition.
When you catch the ball, I want you to say the name of a person, somebody really special who died, and then I want you to say how they died. And you may cry if you like, that is encouraged.
As they sit around and talk tactics, General Titus stands up and says,
I've never been one for making confessions, so I want you to know you're fighting with.
He then tells them that he will go first before dropping his backstory. You see, the regent sent him and his men to intimidate the Parliament of Sarawu into voting against independence from the realm. With the people ultimately voting for freedom, Titus was then ordered to open fire on the capital. When he refused, his ship was shot down. Knowing that his men would fight to the death, he made a deal.
My men's lives for the surrender of my own. I begged for mercy from the regent.
However, Balisarius executed his men and spared him instead.
You should understand that today before you choose to follow me tomorrow.
They should have understood this a week ago, through organic dialogue interactions, not a round-table confession and therapy session. And the fight is tomorrow? They literally only just started training the villagers. Milius then chimes in, explaining that she was raised in a place like Felt. When the Imperium ships appeared in the sky, they turned to their elders for how to respond, but they all cowered and submitted, saying,
What can we do against the Mother World? Those who are too weak were killed.
Sent into labor camps, Milius and her people were finally saved by Darien and the Resistance.
So when the time comes, I'll give my life to protect this village.
We then get the backstory of Nemesis. Honestly, the only character I cared for in these films. Probably because she barely speaks and doesn't have to utter any nonsensical and pointless dialogue. Like Milius, her village and child were slaughtered by the Imperium. She explains that long ago, they were a people of war, before their transformation into a peaceful fishing village. As the flashback continues, we see her dig out the ancient gauntlets of her ancestors, before severing both her hands to put them on, explaining,
The bloodlust of my ancestors lived in those gauntlets.
Not only did it teach her how to fight, but it made her into a creature of revenge. But this contradicts the poignant moment she had in part 1 when she told us,
There is a difference between justice and revenge.
When she ends up killing the spider beast, she tells the group not to celebrate as there was no honor in this.
This could easily be any of you in the gutter of some forgotten world.
The only problem is, her backstory now effectively contradicts the character we thought she was, and she ends up lying here in some forgotten world in the name of revenge. So, her character arc is nullified by the end of this movie. It's such a shame that the writers do this to her character, and worse, that they aren't even conscious of it. This also means that she didn't earn her skills as a badass fighter through training and dedication. She merely put gloves on that told her what to do.
It is said that the dragon warrior can survive for months at a time on nothing but the dew of a single ginkgo leaf and the energy of the universe.
Okay, it's time for one of our favorite games on the show called What If It Was Purple?
This device extracts and redistributes muscle memory. Ow! Hey, I didn't do that!
Look, whoever you are, you should know that killing me won't change a thing.
Look, man, I'm just along for the ride on this one.
And there you have it, folks. The best character in the films has been sabotaged by Snyder's lack of restraint.
This is sad. Very sad only.
A few moments later.
I have contained my rage for as long as possible, but I shall unleash my fury upon you like the crashing of 1,000 waves!
Here we arrive at Tarek's story.
None of us get to choose our parents, and mine happened to be king and queen.
Well, how lucky for you. We're told his father insisted on presenting their terms to the armies of the Motherworld himself, and they responded by sending back his dead body with the threat of invasion. Oh, I guess he's not so lucky. But then we get one of the most bizarre moments in the entire duology. He says that,
My mother, for honor's sake, she would not run.
And so she decided to end her life. What purpose was this supposed to serve?
The queen knew to preserve the bloodline and the throne.
If she wanted to preserve the throne and the bloodline, then why did she kill herself? None of this makes any sense.
I ran for the preservation of a bloodline that no longer exists.
The bloodline does exist with you, you bloody muppet. Snyder, why are you doing this to your characters? Do you hate them more than the fictional Imperium?
Answer me, man!
Tarek then ends by saying that he will go home.
To atone for the mistake of misplaced honor.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative. It gets the people going.
As we arrive at Kora, she tells him that she was a war orphan that was suited to the discipline of military life. She had served on a warship and believed that she'd found a family among her troops. That was until she arrived on Velt.
This place taught me what a home and family could really be.
Conveniently, she leaves out the fact that she murdered a child and helped assassinate the royal family. The very people that were about to stop the Imperium from the callous destruction of worlds that destroyed many of their lives. This is when I realized she was the worst character here. Kora is not a hero, and seems to acknowledge this. But the very least she could do is apologize to Nemesis, Milius, Tarek, and even Gunnar, as she was part of the very war machine that upended their existence. Hell, even Titus had the decency to disobey a direct order from the Regent, while she merely accepted her job of killing Princess Issa before running away like a coward.
Where's your fucking rage? Your self-respect?
Sitting here in your little share circle, having a little whinge and a moan.
It's important to note that she wasn't framed for the murder. She committed the deed, just like Belisarius, but was ultimately betrayed.
Anything else you'd like to add?
She then sneakily changes the subject by mentioning that Titus, the former drunk, has pretended to drink because he doesn't want them to know how much he cares about the coming battle.
Ready as water.
In the masterpiece by Kurosawa, we're given 3 hours to see the samurai hired by the village grow to appreciate their plight, culminating in a bond and deep respect that has them fight on their behalf to the death. But in Rebel Moon, the defenders are already opposed to the antagonistic Motherworld, making the defense of the village a secondary concern rather than a poignant act of selflessness as seen in Seven Samurai. This fundamental misinterpretation diminishes the narrative's potential impact. If they were going to have this round table exposition, then why not do this in front of the villagers? This would have created some sort of understanding between the warriors and villagers and could have helped strengthen their bond. With Hagen informing them that the villagers are ready, Titus says,
"Whatever handful of officers they send down, we take them."
This isn't Seven Samurai. You're not dealing with a handful of bandits, but a dreadnought and its entire battalion. You aren't going to be able to capture the enemy soldiers. He then says, with all their strength in the field, with no mercy, they will spare none that set foot on their land. Which is it? Are you going to capture soldiers or spare none?
Negotiate a trade. You think they would listen?
I do.
What is Titus talking about? He knows the Imperium cannot be reasoned with. We heard as much from his backstory as they executed his squadron when he tried to negotiate their release in return for his surrender.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
The general then orders Kora to make sure the dropship is still in working order, and to hide it from view first thing in the morning. Why not right now? While the Imperium stupidly told them they would be arriving tomorrow, you don't know what time they'll be coming. This made me realize that if the Imperium had arrived now, or any time over the past 5 days, the battle would have been over as nobody was ready.
Rest well. The work begins at dawn.
As Kora hides the dropship inside a waterfall, she's approached by Jimmy the robot.
Hello, James.
The last person who called me that died in my arms.
Kora apologizes, but he tells her that it's alright, because he liked the way it sounded, as it made him feel something other than hopelessness. How does being called a name that reminds you of someone's death make you feel anything other than despair?
I was given memories and love for a child I could not save.
Oh snap, this is awkward. Kora's the reason you can't serve the king and why you couldn't save the child. Asked if that was why he saved Sam, he explains he's not certain, but the thought of her being hurt opened a part of him that had been closed. Isn't he a robot? How has he somehow gained autonomy?
You and I are designed to kill for them. Their nightmare is you and I fighting together.
Well, I'm sure that he wouldn't fight with you if you also told him that you killed the princess. In fact, he'd probably end you on the spot.
You know that I'm Arthurleus, adopted daughter of the regent Belisarius, and the assassin of the Princess Issa.
Good thing Kora's self-preservation instinct overrides her morality when the script needs it to. Jimmy then tells her that she has to know the villagers cannot win. Well, I know they shouldn't be able to win, but I'm pretty sure contrivances are in order. Spotting the king's gaze descending from above, Hagen tells the villagers to finish up and find their positions. At the same time, Cassius and Noble get a layout of their formations.
It's the grain. Look, they piled it against the building so we can't destroy them.
Their thermal imaging shows a cluster of people at the longhouse at the very top of the village, which they surmise are the women and children. But somehow, the thermal imaging doesn't show the people they have hiding in the tunnels waiting to ambush them. Their plan is to forestall a battle in the village, and while Noble negotiated, capture the women and children.
We won't need it when they see blades at the throat of their most vulnerable.
With the villagers minutes away from death, Kora decides to give herself a haircut to make herself look as masculine as Aris is feminine. There are over a dozen dropships and as many fighter jets approaching, but Kora thinks now is the right time to have a new look. It's not like this is going to stop people from recognizing her. After all, she is the most wanted criminal in the galaxy. Now, with the air superiority, their cannons, tanks, and thousands of soldiers, you might think the enemy's plan is to surround them from all sides, but no. Noble and his battalions approach them from the front. This is the only reason the upcoming ambush from the defenders ends up working.
Tell me what we're trying to achieve here.
The same thing as the last time we met. I kill you.
Noble tells her it was an honor to receive a scar from the Scargiver, and literally seconds after threatening to kill him, Kora tells him that there's no need for blood to be spilled today. She offers him a chance to avoid slaughter, but Noble explains her capture will give him a spot in the Senate. As he puts it, it's what he deserves. But Kora responds by saying,
Take the grain you need to feed your men, no more and no less.
You know, as if she didn't hear that he said he wanted her and not the grain. Told to take the grain and report to Belisarius that the warriors he sought evaded capture, Noble asks her if he should take nothing. Mate, she said to take the grain. That's something. Why don't the characters listen to what the other person is saying? He should have said, and should I take nothing more, which would have made more sense and set up the line that follows.
You take your lives. This is your choice.
Thankfully, Noble aptly points out what we're all thinking.
You think you have any power with which to negotiate? You do not.
He then explains they know where their women and children are hiding, due to the thermal imaging, which conveniently didn't inform him of the men hiding beneath his feet. Pointing out that her plan was failing, he offers a different arrangement, for him to take the grain and her, in return for the safety of the villagers.
The one most sought after by the Honorable Regent is you.
And so, Kora turns herself in, yet unable to let her go. Gunnar fires a shot at the bell, telling the hidden men to begin opening fire. I need to point out that while the Imperium usually can't be trusted, all Noble wants is the grain to feed his men, and Kora to feed his ambition. Considering they would need more grain in the future, he would have likely left the villagers alive so they could keep working. But Gunnar selfishly condemns everyone he knew to a war that could have been avoided, and robs Kora of her redemptive moment. The way to fix this scene without compromising any of the characters would be to let Kora turn herself in, giving her somewhat of a redemptive arc, and then have Noble fly back to the King's Gate having achieved his goal, only for him to go back on his deal and order the capture of the other warriors, thereby prompting the villagers to fight back to protect them. We could then have Gunnar and either Titus or Tarik flying to the dropship to rescue Kora.
We need to get you up to that ship! Come on, you're our only chance!
Well, that's because diplomacy went out the door with your stupidity. As Kora and Gunnar head to the dropship, furious by the surprise attack, Noble enters the recently dug-up bunker and gets revenge, while his men began to lay siege to the village. I'm going to be honest, if you remove the logic, the action sequences look okay, but you shouldn't have to do that to enjoy a movie. With the soldiers breaching the barn holding the women and children, Nemesis begins to slay them. At the same time, Sam and Aris are also forced to return fire. Den the underrated Chad manages to destroy a dropship using an explosive, before taking down more soldiers with his rifle. However, when he sees Noble return to his dropship, he decides that the best thing to do here is tackle the cyborg with superhuman strength and try to fight him by hand. As a result, he's killed.
We'll drop into formation. When I give the signal, start to smoke.
Spotting two dropships returning to the King's Gate, Kora and Gunnar follow them, using a smoke grenade to make the enemy think they were friendly soldiers returning with a damaged ship. Again, we know the Dreadnoughts have trackers and can even remotely control the dropships, so they should have been able to note that this dropship is not one of theirs. But because the story needs them to forget this, they remotely control their ship and allow Kora and Gunnar to enter the hangar safely, disguised as injured soldiers.
That ship is taking damage.
I have casualties.
Heading back to the battlefield, Titus and Tarik tell their squad of villagers to protect each other and show no mercy before running out and engaging the enemy. We were led to believe that the women were also armed, as they had been training to use firearms and harvesting tools. But as we cut back to Nemesis, the people she was protecting are unarmed, except for Sam and Aris, enabling their enemies to momentarily gain the upper hand. What happened to all the training we saw earlier with rifles and blades?
Answer me, man!
In order for the setup of the training sequence to work and not have been a waste of time, you need a payoff. When you introduce something, it needs to lead somewhere for the moment to have meaning. That's the whole point of Chekhov's gun. A notable example of this being done correctly is Ripley using the loader at the very start of Aliens.
Well, I can drive that loader. I have a Class 2 rating. Where you want it?
This moment is a setup, which is paid off in her confrontation with the alien queen at the very end.
Get away from her, you bitch!
As a result of Snyder neglecting to arm the farmers in the barn, despite spending a day training them, Nemesis is overwhelmed and loses one of her arms, before getting stabbed in the stomach. With the last soldier distracted by a kid that stabs him, she's able to use the moment to finish him off. We then have a shot of Aris, Sam, and everyone in the barn mourning her death, but all I kept wondering was, why aren't all these people armed with at least the sickles we saw them have during training? At the same time, what's bizarre is that Titus spends half his time using his rifle as a melee weapon in the open while soldiers run towards him instead of just firing at him. There's also a shot of Titus running at a dozen soldiers on the bridge and deciding to tackle one of them, while the others shoot at everything but him. Who did the fight choreography for this movie? Tarik is no better, somehow wielding two axes instead of a gun, and managing to kill soldiers while remaining unscathed. The PG-13 rating sanitizes the violence to such an extent that we have Tarek's axes hitting armor non-lethally, but somehow resulting in deaths.
Well, I got one down in the hold! And we'll attempt to move you now, okay?
As we cut back to the ship, the medics discover Kora and Gunnar and rush to take them to the infirmary.
Some shrapnel damage. Infantry seems to be suffering from a small ammo wound.
Unlucky for these men, who are merely medics, Gunnar and Kora spring up and take them out. We're almost an hour and a half into the movie, and the first people Kora killed are a medical team trying to save her.
Are we the baddies?
Having taken out the first squadron of enemy soldiers, Tarek and Titus begin celebrating prematurely, completely forgetting that there were armored tanks and hundreds of more soldiers ahead of them.
We won't have long to get off this thing before it blows.
Okay.
Kora then makes her way into the engine room to set charges off, while Gunnar manned the dropship. The engine room is weird. Not only do we learn the massive Dreadnought was powered by coal, in, I don't know, a homage to the Titanic, but all the fuel seems to go through this massive face on one end. It looks interesting, but makes no sense, especially when you find out that Snyder said that it was a trapped god. What the hell is the mythology in this universe? There's a god powered by coal, trapped in an engine room, that powers the king's gaze. Is this one of the gods that Cassius and Noble pray to? I have no idea what's going on.
None of this makes sense.
With Kora planting bombs on the god coal engine thing and only 25 minutes left in the movie, Snyder remembers that Milius is a thing. And so we cut to her and a few other farmers that were hidden pop out of a barn and begin opening fire against the mechanized tanks. Remember how this whole movie was about the Empire needing grain? Well, now I guess they don't care because these tanks are destroying everything in front of them. I'm sorry, but with the Imperium's overwhelming numbers and heavy artillery, the villagers should all be dead by now. As Milius channels her inner Captain Willard from Apocalypse Now and jumps into the water of the moat, she somehow manages to get close enough to a tank equipped with rockets, a Gatling gun, and protected by over 30 soldiers, and pick up a rocket launcher. She literally stands 5 feet away from it, in full view of all the soldiers, yet manages to get a shot off unscathed, while the soldiers appear to just shoot around her. She and all the warriors have so much plot armor that it defies belief. Earlier, when the villagers launched the first rocket at a dropship, the explosion was immense, enough to kill everyone inside and the dozen or so men around it. So Milius should be dead here if we're following the movie's rules on how explosions and these weapons work, but she doesn't even get a scratch. As we cut to Kora activating the charges, she's approached by a soldier that spots her setting up the bombs, but who takes his sweet time to shoot her, giving her the opportunity to kill him. This is before Kora, our hero, jumps down into the coal pit below to slaughter coal workers armed with only shovels, who all die trying to defend themselves. I don't know how coal could possibly power a Dreadnought, as I mentioned earlier, but I'm more confused as to why Snyder had Kora kill medics and coal workers. She's becoming increasingly unlikable by the minute.
There is a situation in the engine room. A woman has infiltrated the ship.
Realizing that Arthurlaeus has come to them, Noble orders Cassius to fire on the village before going off to find her.
I want her captured at once. Cassius, you may fire on the village.
He continues by saying there's no need for the grain now, as the Scargiver has come to them, which begs the question, what was the point of all that happens in this film?
Answer me, man!
Cassius brings up a good point. I mean, even if they don't need the grain...
We have men on the ground. A few less mouths to feed.
I get that Belisarius wants her captured, but slaughtering your own men for no reason is stupid. He could have easily have just said, pull the men out and fire on the village. It's like he relishes in the death of his own soldiers. Even if you allow him to say this, there's been an undercurrent of tension from Cassius, all the way from Noble's resurrection. You get the inkling that his number 2 doesn't fully agree with his methods. Perhaps to add nuance to his characterization and maybe show that not all Imperium soldiers are bastards, much in the same way that we had with Titus and his soldiers. You could have him ignore this order and allow Noble to go on his suicide run himself, but everyone from the heroes to the villains are two-dimensional. They're either bad or good.
You heard the Admiral. Charge the cannons.
Target the village.
We then witness more of Kora's heroic virtues, for she has now graduated from slaughtering medics, coal workers, to shooting soldiers in the back. How admirable. It's like everyone from the farmers to the warriors are fighting with more honor than she is. After saving Milius from certain death, Tarek hits us with,
I thought dying in battle was all I wanted, but if I must...
Together.
Hang on, I distinctly remember you saying that.
Home, to atone for the mistake, misplaced honor.
And so, having now resigned themselves to dying, Milius and Tarek stand up in the open, 20 feet away from an approaching tank and damn near 30 soldiers with their rifles aimed at them.
Suicide is badass. No.
And due to the plot armor protecting them, don't get hit once. It's here that Jimmy the robot arrives and begins to slaughter the enemy, while taking many hits to his armor, before throwing a grenade into the tank and landing in slow motion.
You gonna do superhero landing? Wait for it! Woo! Superhero landing! Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
This all looks cool, but it's all spectacle and no substance. I clearly remember in part 1 that a single shot from a rifle was enough to knock Jimmy to the ground.
It makes no damn sense.
But here he's just tanking hits like it's nothing. Where's the consistency?
Answer me, man!
At least follow your own rules. We cut over to the Dreadnought, which despite being an intergalactic battleship, begins to aim its cannon towards the village. Not only is the damn vessel powered by coal, but their aiming mechanism is analog and needs to be manually steered with a hand wheel.
Target acquired. We have a lock on the village.
What do you mean you have a lock on the village? It's not a moving target. It's stationary. With a small unit of soldiers waiting for Kora outside the elevator, she kicks their leader, causing multiple able-bodied men to stagger back.
Nice,
some even running away like cowards. This gives her the opportunity to shoot all of them over 7 seconds, where none of them fire a single shot towards her. They all just stumble towards her, with their rifles pointed at her head, but don't even fire a single shot, giving her plot armor a break for the time being. What's comical is that one of them just collapses after being nudged by her shoulder and passes out for no reason. They're all conveniently incompetent here so that she can survive, but happen to be extremely competent when it came time for universe conquering. There's just a major discrepancy between how the Imperium was described to us in the flashbacks and how they function here. Still, Kora manages to disarm the captain and use his own flaming sword to kill him, before realizing the grip on the sword is also hot. Who designed these weapons?
It's the poor carpenter that blames his shoddy tools for the— Ow! Face!
Having burnt her hand, instead of taking the gloves of any of the soldiers Kora had managed to defeat, she grabs a piece of cloth and wraps it around the sword. She then leaves all the rifles, which would have been more useful. This is only to set up her next confrontation against Noble, who suddenly appears on the other side of the door.
Thanks. Do not accept your surrender. Make a better ballad when I slay you.
Even Noble, who has ample opportunity to shoot her, decides to continue monologuing as her explosive charges begin to bring the Dreadnought down. Gunnar jumps in, shooting his lieutenant, and is shot in the chest in return, as Kora and Noble have an underwhelming duel in the collapsing hangar. Kora is then flung headfirst into the side of the ship, and instead of being dazed or momentarily knocked out, continues to fight. I understand why Noble is fine, he's an enhanced human, but Kora should have been incapacitated. Luckily for Kora, as Noble begins to strangle her, Gunnar stabs him in the chest, giving her the opportunity to take his head. The pair then fly the dropship out of the hangar just in time, as the villagers and warriors look on as the Dreadnought smashes into the ground. It's here I realize that the only warrior that died was Nemesis, who was only fighting 5 men in the barn, while Titus, Milius, and Tarek somehow survived against hundreds of ground troops, dropships, and mechanized tanks. Unfortunately for Kora, Gunnar then succumbs to his wounds.
Stay with me. Why can't I have this one?
It might be because you're a horrible character that lied to all the warriors and villagers about who you are. Conveniently, we then have the rebels arrive and take out the remaining dropships and fighters. Where the hell were you all this time? It might have been nice to see you help out earlier, instead of sweeping in to clean up once the battle was over.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part. I didn't do shit!
The film ends with a funeral for the dead, and Hagen exclaiming that the only way to honor them would be by remembering their names.
Honor the fallen. Honor my brother and his bravery.
Oh, shut up, Devra. Your brother is dead because you wouldn't support him to defend this village. You literally left with most of your fighters, saying this battle was pointless, only to arrive once everything was almost done.
Do not speak of me when you speak of honor. I've lied to you.
Oh shit, based Kora. Let her cook herself. Kora finally reveals that she was the adopted daughter of the Regent Belisarius and the assassin of Princess Issa. And here we get a bombshell from Titus, who reveals
But you were not her assassin, for the princess is alive.
What the hell is going on in this movie? Even if we're to accept this, how does Titus know she isn't dead? They found him in a gladiatorial planet where he was fighting for booze. How could he possibly know this? Damn it, Snyder. Why did you write this in here beyond wanting the snooze fest to continue in 4 more films?
Answer me, man!
Devra then chimes in that she will stand with them and looks to Miliot, who honestly should be leading the rebels now due to the courage she had shown through not only following Darien, but by fighting, when all seemed as though it was pretty much lost.
You have a reason now, do you not? To find her and to fight?
Titus continues that he too will join Kora, before Jimmy jumps in and says that he wants to help as well.
I have no choice. It is my honor to fight.
Which is it, Jimmy? Do you have no choice, or are you choosing to fight as it is an honor? I have no idea, and neither does Snyder. And that, my friends, is the end of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver.
Michael's movie? 2 thumbs down.
The film ultimately concludes unsatisfactorily, leaving the main antagonist Belisarius alive and only seen in flashbacks, with the exception of the end of Part 1, where he grilled Noble in the astral plane for not capturing Kora. We also have the warriors vowing to find Issa and defeat him, hinting at Zack Snyder's ambitious yet seemingly unrealistic plan to create several more sequels. After more than 4 hours of runtime, the warriors in Rebel Moon still seem like randomly generated NPCs. I've appreciated many of Snyder's films, including 300 and his adaptation of Watchmen, and I've defended Man of Steel. However, his recent ventures have been marred by a real decline in film quality, and a troubling trend with his fan base that revolves around the necessity for the director's cut, supposedly superior versions meant to fix the original films. But this isn't Justice League. He has full control here, and the cut he released is the director's cut. Part 1 was a profound disappointment. Zack Snyder, serving as director, co-writer, producer, and cinematographer, failed to effectively develop character dynamics, expand on the world building, or tell a cohesive narrative. And Rebel Moon Part 2 The Scargiver offers no improvement. The sequel, also penned by Snyder, Kurt Johnstad, and Shay Hatton, suffers from dismal dialogue so generic it seems it could have been written by an AI. The film attempts to portray grandeur with its epic score but falls flat, delivering only bottom-tier cinema, and much of the sequel is bogged down, wasting significant time on slow-motion grain harvesting or on backstory in a failed attempt to engage the audience. All the character interactions are reduced to further exposition rather than genuine emotional exchanges, and the character development remains non-existent, reflecting the replaceability and interchangeability of the characters. Overall, it feels like what could have been a concise third act of the first movie is unnecessarily stretched out into a full-length sequel without justification, marked by underwhelming performances and a sense of redundancy. In the end, Rebel Moon is a rehash of Seven Samurai with a Star Wars paint job, without any of the charm, depth, or filmmaking competence of either, and the prospect of enduring 4 more similar films seems like agonizing torture at best.
It's really over. It's... No.